Welcome to Lecture 16, the Introduction to Environmental Science. This is Fire Ecology, the last lecture in Unit 4, Environmental Resource Issues. So we're talking about fire ecology from a historic view, Smokey the Bear and his history and interest in controlling fires, the importance of fire to endangered species in Florida, and what happens without regular fire. Well, Lake Wales Ridge, that's where South Florida State College is located. Fire has been central to the persistence of all the various types of Lake Wales Ridge scrub. We learned about that in lecture number 14. Endemic species on the ridge are adapted to fire, and without it, they really don't exist. Endemic species are found only in very few places. This is a recap of what we have learned about the Lake Wales Ridge. It's 100 miles long. It stretches from all the way up in Lake County down here into Highlands County. 10 miles wide approximately. Some places a little wider, some places a little narrower, but it's a fairly narrow stretch of land. It's home to 44 endemic species of plants, insects, and animals. Fairly high concentration for such a small area. Most of it's also estimated to be more than 1 million years old. 1880, there was a lot of growth going on. The country was expanding, and Professor Charles Sargent, say that right, say that backwards, no, say it right. Charles Sargent had a report he put out on fire and forests, early history with fire in its eye. This is also going to be the assignment for this particular lecture, so you'll be able to hot link to this and read that. But Professor Sargent had several causes of fire listed. Basically, clearing of land was the #1 cause of fire. Hunters caused a lot of fire as well. Locomotives, as they rolled across the open prairie and land, they would start fires. Malice, people just burning because they wanted to burn. To improve pasturage was a fairly small number of fires in 1880, recorded by Professor Sargent, 197. Campfires, going down the list, smokers did their fair share. Lightning only caused 32 fires, based upon what Professor Sargent had, Dr. Sargent said. Well, going further into his report, it was all based upon local surveys. Only value of material actually destroyed by fire is included in these estimates. That's why it was thought to be so damaging. Loss of timber, great as it is insignificant. This is quoting Dr. Sargent, to the damage to soil caused by fire. So fire is bad in 1880. Forest destroyed by fire, all those trees, old and young, the embryo of forests of succeeding centuries would be destroyed. That is how fire was viewed. All fire is harmful. And 1880, we were expanding to the west. We were closing out the continent, so to speak, and we wanted to grow. We didn't want to burn things. Well, fire suppression continued. There's a gentleman with the name of Gifford Pinochet. Pinochet basically followed the norms of the day. In 1890, reading what Sargent had written, fire is bad for forests. So the goal of Gifford Pinochet was to control or stop all forest fires. Opponents of Pinochet, they advocated light burning, or what they called Indian fires, and that's the forerunner of today's prescribed burns. But they were dismissed by the Forest Service in 1910 when the Forest Service tried prescribed burning, and it failed. From there on, official policy was to fight all fires that started. Allocate money to states to fight forest fires, nip those forest fires in the bud, get rid of them. So fire, a century ago, was viewed as a bad thing. And out of that sprang this cute little bear here, Smokey the Bear campaign, started in 1944. He was introduced as a symbol of forests destroyed by fire. In other words, Smokey lost his home and you had to put the fire out. Care will prevent 9 out of 10 forest fires. Well, influenced 2 or 3 generations, including me. Fire was bad. That was one of the things that was pounded into our heads as young children. Put out those fires. Well, and fire was running wild, only because we didn't know how to manage it and know how important it was. Prescribed burning was banned not allowed on many public lands in the southern U.S. for more than 50 years. This ban extended into the 1990s, which wasn't that long ago. Oops, went too far. Let's go back one. There we go. So what changed? Farmers and ranchers on private lands, in the South in particular, never stopped burning. On private lands, it wasn't illegal to burn. Just thought, oh, it's a horrible thing to do. But they understood that burning was a lot easier to get rid of that extra wood, that extra downfall, if you will, than trying to mow all that underbrush, and it kept it clearer, allowed those pastures to remain fresh. Basically, what this fire suppression ended up doing was greatly increasing fire return intervals, and that did a great deal of harm. Fire return is how frequently places need to burn. Go back to lecture 14 if you need to review that. It shifted the fire return intervals from between 10 and 20 years to 1,000 years or more. I do wonder how they estimate that. But anyway, greatly changed those dynamics. Suppressing vegetation was a big thing. This is kind of from my own personal history. The Arkansas Ozarks, where I grew up. That's me. I'm one of the guys in that picture. I'm the one holding the axe. Fire suppression. Since 1960, this little piece of the Arkansas Ozarks has developed a dense growth of eastern red cedar. Prior to this, it was actually a fair amount of open pasture land. You can't find any of that anymore. Now, those eastern red cedars, planted by my dad, were supposed to pay my way through college. I was going to cut them down and sell them for fence posts. They're still there, so I found another way to pay for college. Thanks, Dad. We replaced those open prairies at the edge of the Great Prairie with higher biodiversity to this forest, which is okay, but really it's probably driven the deer away. We used to have a lot more deer. One of the primary reasons that deer prefer open lawns to thickets of cedar is that they can see better. They certainly will go there to hide, but they're going to be grazing in other areas. So, kind of a personal history. We're still suppressing fire all on this little piece of Ozark woodlands, and someday it will burn like crazy. Back to Florida. Sandpine scrub. This is our flavor of this particular lecture. Sandpine scrub favors high intensity, though infrequent fires. You have to burn through all that underbrush every 10 to 20 years. Scrubby flatwoods, longleaf pine, slash pine, all those things come in if you get rid of sandpine scrub. This is a graphic a few years ago, but the images still apply. Average rainfall in this particular county by month between 2010 and 2011. When I say average, this is an average of several sites in the county. You can see that during the dry season, actually March of 2010 got a fair amount of rain, but for the most part during that dry season period, which actually stretches from October through May, you get far less rain. And in October 2010 didn't rain at all, which is a bit unusual, but that's okay. During the rainy season is when we get almost, I say 60-70% of our rainfall. So June, July, August, September, usually stretching into October. And hurricane season corresponds with those things. So that's when you can expect to see fires actually is at the end of the dry season, because that's when things are warming up a great deal. So, looking at fire conditions, wildfire conditions in the dry season. This is actually from April 2012. The dark pink color represents areas that are very, very dry, highly at risk for burning. Reds and all those colors are above what the number is 550 on the scale that's being used here. But when you move forward just a little bit into, say, the rainy season, you can completely reverse these conditions in the wet season. This is from June of 2012, or a mere 3 months later. The greens and the yellows, the blues represent wet conditions. There's not a lot of, not a lot of chance of burning in most of those areas. You see there's still some in southwest Florida, but not a lot. So those things change very quickly in Florida. They even change from year to year. The graphic showing April 2012 has extreme, very, very dry conditions. And then April 2013, we have much wetter conditions, much less likely to have wildfires in that period of time. Lake Wales Ridge is sand, and that sand tends not to burn. You can see that image there on the right is just Sand. Sand, there's nothing, no organic matter to burn in it. All these sands are high in quartz content and low in clay and other minerals, and obviously low in organic matter, which all of that stuff burns. So what happens when these areas don't burn? Well, the non-fire adapted species take over. You start out with scrubby flatwoods. This is an image actually from Archibald Biological Station, and an area that is burned every 10 years that is scrubby flatwoods. If it isn't burned, you end up with a much more dense stand of vegetation. This the lower slide, is of sandpine. And sandpine is certainly its habitat, but it's not as rich. Fewer endemic species, loss of diversity if it doesn't burn. Now, one thing about areas that are evolved to burn, evolved with fire, ultimately those areas will burn. You add up fuel accumulates, and more intense fire will ultimately happen, and that fire will end up killing everything that's in the forest. All the species, crown fires are incredibly destructive. Normally the fire just runs along the ground. So this is an image from the Florida Forest Service natural role of fire. Summary. I told you it was a brief lecture. Talked about the historic view of fire from 1880. Looked at Smokey the Bear and a bit of his history, although he has been reformed recently. This fire happens to be one of those control burns. You can see the firefighter standing behind the fire, and this is one of those low burning fires that's actually a good fire to have. The importance to endangered species in Florida and what happens without regular fire. These are some websites that I recommend. They're hot linked when you see the PDF information for this presentation, taken from the following websites: Good Fires, Florida Department of Forestry, DOF.com, Forest Encyclopedia Net, SmokeyTheBear.com, and that long one, Fresh from Florida, etc., so the natural role of fire. And here are the references, other references for this particular lecture. You should now have access to the Lecture 16 quiz. Once you have taken that, you will have access to the Unit 4 test. We're at that point already.